So I have to just begin this with some honesty, and I hope you don't mind.
Sure.
I do not understand Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah.
I feel like it's a club that I was not invited to and then later couldn't get into. But I understand this was your gateway drug into this world of play. Well, I heard it was Candyland, but Dungeons and Dragons, it sounds more intense. So I'm starting there in terms of leadership. Tell me about how you got introduced to the game.
Yeah, I would describe D&D as the thing that really unleashed my imagination as a kid. You know, when I was like 9 or 10, I would test pretty well, like when I would go into classes for school, but I got horrible grades. I never did an assignment. I was kind of all over the place. And I discovered this whole new world that I didn't know existed, where there were stories and there were characters and there were rules that allowed you to structure your imagination. And it just unlocked something for me. It helped to take like all these discombobulated thoughts and all this kind of raw energy. And, you know, I was a pretty creative kid, and direct it. It introduced me to game design. It introduced me to reading. And, you know, not only is D&D a lifelong passion of mine, I actually attribute it with, you know, helping me become the person I am today, and finding success in life and success in school. So, you know, I mean, for the uninitiated, D&D is basically a game where you assume a role of a hero, and then the rest of it is kind of in the name. As that hero, you go and battle dragons and other nasty creatures, and you explore what we call our dungeons, which are basically just kind of structured adventures. And it sounds very rulesy and it sounds very formidable, but
Yeah, like there's a rule book that looks like psychology's DSM.
Yeah,
like, it is
if
really...
I have met 12 people in my life who've read the rule book cover to cover, that would be a lot. It's really just a set of guidelines and a set of an excuse to have like fun fantasy improv with your friends. I think D&D at the core of it, it's about the friends that gather around the table. And then, you know, when you think broader, it's about a passion that people have for, you know, a game, a way of socializing, and a set of stories and lore that people fall in love with over the course of a life. And so like D&D started when I was a little kid. I'm Gen X. You know, we kind of missed the millennials. I think Pokemon really knocked it out of the park with them.
Yeah.
But we brought it back up with the Gen X kids, Gen Z. And now there's like this multipolar set of users for D&D who are equally passionate about it. And it's like this passing of the baton or the passing of the torch of gameplay. And we see that for D&D. We see it with Magic the Gathering, another big game we have. We see it with Monopoly. We see it with all of our board games.
I was going to say board games kind of, I feel like, had a resurgence during the pandemic. I know I introduced my kids to Candyland. Is that Hasbro?
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Chances are you'll name a board game and I'll say, yep, it's Hasbro.
Parcheesi. My husband and I play Boggle, which is way harder than it seems. It just feels like one of the things that strikes me as we enter this conversation, maybe because we're both Gen X, is like adults are the market for games now. Like, I feel like when I talk about D&D, in a way, I'm talking about other adults and fandoms. And I was actually pretty shocked to learn that like a good amount of Hasbro revenue comes from people over the age of 13.
Yeah. I think like last count, it was over 60%, trending to over 65% of our business is over 13. But, you know, I would argue that the entire business of play, whether it's video games, mobile games, collectibles, toys, board games, the market is moving to be an adult-oriented market as opposed to a kid-oriented market. Kids are still important. You create a first handshake with them, you know, starting in like preschool. But increasingly, the median ages of the people who play are aging up. Like people aren't putting down their playthings when they become teenagers. They're just kind of
Gen
doubling
X,
down.
We like to collect. And then I heard the term kidult. Is that a thing or is that a business press thing?
That that's a business press thing that's trying to become a thing that I hope doesn't become a thing. I hope we just call it people.
But who are
Because
they?
basically everyone plays.
What does your data tell us about who it is who we're talking about? Because I just said consumers over the age of 13. That's massive. So who are we really talking about? And are they playing, collecting, video gaming? Like, what does the kidult like to do?
I think a kidult defines a person who values play in their life. And there's a whole bunch of different segmentations about how they value play. You know, they might be kind of more of a casual kind of player and they play board games with their friends. It's a way to socialize and bring people together, you know, connect with their family members. And then it all goes all the way through to people who kind of define an important part of themselves through their fandom. And, you know, that might be like a very passionate D&D player. You see it like at Comic Cons around the world where people dress up as their favorite character, whether it's Iron Man or Thor or a Jedi. And it's kind of everyone in between. And I think increasingly, part of the reason I don't like the term is I suppose I'm a kidult. And I don't like to be labeled per se. But, you know, I think something like 85% of people identify play as an important part of their lives today. And that's probably double what it was from our parents' generation. And I think that's just a net good thing in the world. It gives people a release. It helps people connect with others. And it just brings some joy to their lives. And I think the magic of play and the magic of the kidult is that there's so many others of you around you that want to connect and want to rekindle that kind of playful spirit they had in their youth.
Yeah, and people don't talk about that often. I feel like in all the sort of jokes about a Comic Con or jokes about the getting dressed up, sometimes there isn't an acknowledgement of like, hey, at least they're hanging out. You know what I mean? Like they're not the people I'm doing news stories about in the loneliness epidemic. And you know, in the panic over video games and things like that, which I do think there's some validity to that. I'm actually surprised at how many people still want to be in these games that are a little more face to face or community oriented.
Yeah, if you're so into something that you want to dress up as an anime character, we shouldn't make fun of you. We should be jealous of you because you've got legitimate passion in your life. And that's a wonderful thing. And you're surrounded by other people who do as well.
That same intensity that you and I are talking about, I feel like is now part of what's called fandom. And these are really powerful communities that can really be, you know, quick to call something out as inauthentic or corporate. They do a lot of kind of policing of the thing that they love. And I want to know if there's a time that you have faced that because you've been in gaming as well, video games as well. I think you were involved with Halo, right?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
have you ever faced a criticism from the fan base where you learned something from it, where you were like, you know what? Okay, I heard it, and this is what I'm going to keep in mind going forward as a leader.
So I've faced a whole bunch. You know, in D&D, we frankly, you know, stepped on our own feet through an open license that we had that we very ham-handedly tried to adjust. Our community became very upset.
An open
And
license meaning you made it possible for people to create their own.
yeah, so we had a game license back in like 2002 where we open sourced a component of the D&D rules. We tried to amend that license. We did it in, frankly, all the wrong ways, from how we communicated it to what we were trying to do. And we took a lot of flack for, you know, probably a good 10 or 12 weeks. Burned through a lot of trust with our users. And, you know, we immediately changed. Not only did we revert back to what we had been doing, we actually went even more towards open standards, putting many of the rules in the Creative Commons. And then we opened up our own platforms as a distribution vehicle for other people's content. So I think we learned a lot from that. And I think we're honestly, that was probably 2 years ago, and we're still rebuilding trust with certain elements of that community.
What did you learn? Was it don't move too fast? Was it be honest about what you're doing?
Well, I think it was a couple of things. So what we were trying to do is we were trying to protect the rules and the integrity of what the open source game rules were for, which was to propagate this hobby called tabletop gaming. And what we were seeing is like ad agencies were using it to create ad campaigns for hamburgers.
Oh,
Or
okay.
people were using it to like, make their own video games and kind of skirt around, RIP protections. And I think the biggest thing I think we learned is when you do something, you shouldn't just do it because you're trying to be defensive and protect your property. You should understand what all the stakeholders, how they might kind of react to it, and be very transparent about what you're trying to do. And then, frankly, I think the second thing we learned is don't execute something unless you really can make it simple and easy to understand. Because the way that we kind of did mental gymnastics to understand open source law and try to amend what we were doing, it just became a mess. And then, beyond that with D&D, we face these things all the time. Inside of Magic, there's a lot of feedback about how many cards we release, how many sets we release per year, what IP we employ with it,
Oh
how
my
we
God.
balance
These
the game.
kidults are up in the mix.
Huh?
These kidults are up in the mix.
For
They're
sure,
like,
for sure. But I think they're an incredibly valuable resource for you in terms of giving you early feedback about the direction you're taking the game. And they make the game's like kind of sense of ownership much broader than just a company's. They make it a community's. And I think that's the power of modern brands. If you're able to create a community and you're able to create ambassadorship in the community, that's the way you break through today. It's other people talking you up, and it's that human energy that powers a brand.
I want to talk about the flip side of that. Just an example. So the D&D player's handbook removes some like racial traits, introduce some new inclusivity stuff in 2025, and like there's a backlash, right?
Yeah.
And I see people talking about it, people calling it woke overreach. Now, for someone like me who's always felt like, why would I play this game? Like, it seems like not for me, based on some of this stuff. I was like, why not? Why such a big deal? So, how do you, again, as a player and as someone who just, you're involved in these kinds of shifts, what are you looking at when people respond to things politically? It's woke, it's a problem, they're doing something to us, the fans.
Well, I don't know that it's a satisfactory answer because it's art as much as it is science. So to me, opening up the game to be more representative of people, to reply to legitimate feedback about, uh, things that we might have published over the last 50 years of the game, where society has changed quite a bit and expectations have changed quite a bit. That makes a ton of sense for us to do. Likewise, if certain people want to play the game in a certain way because they don't like the way that we've defined something, they have the agency to do that. And in fact, increasingly, our online tools allow them to do that and pick what they want. And so, like, I would say the changes that we made to the D&D player's handbook, that's been a net good.
And yet, you have someone like Elon Musk out there, wondering if Hasbro is for sale in response to people claiming that it's kind of pushing a woke ideology. And, the reason why I'm dwelling on this is because it feels like in the aftermath of the 2020, racial reckoning and the backlash to that, companies can't escape politics. And I'm wondering how you are thinking about it because you haven't been able to escape it either, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's always going to happen once in a while. I mean, it's not something that you usually seek out. But again, I just got to go back to first principle, which is we want to open up our games and our brands to the widest assortment of people possible. regardless of where they are in the political spectrum, regardless of where they live in the world, regardless of what their backgrounds are or what they identify as.
It sounds like you're thinking I should not focus so much on these kind of culture war battles that happen with the fandoms, that they are vocal, but not widespread.
I think that's a fair assessment.
So a few months ago, President Trump said, look, maybe the kids are going to have $2 instead of $30. And maybe those $2 are going to cost a couple bucks more than they would normally. Should they?
Well, I think we're with the Toy Association in the US and across the world that toys should be tariff free. Toys aren't a strategic kind of industry. They don't dictate national security, but they're an important industry. They dictate joy and well-being for, people of all ages, but most notably kids. And it also tends to be a fairly low margin industry. Like if you look at the toy industry in the US, I think there's about 280,000 people that are employed in the industry writ large. But the vast, vast majority of them, like 95% of firms that make toys, are basically mom and pop shops. They're like 5 to 10 people. They're probably working off of an operating margin of, call it 8 to 10%. So, it's relatively thin margins, relatively small operations. And so there isn't a lot of capacity for an industry like that to absorb even a 10 or 20% tariff, and 30% on a place like China, where the majority of that industry sources its volume, is going to be a challenge. For a company
I was reading that toy prices have already jumped like 2%, 2.2% from by May 2025. Has Hasbro had to raise prices, or have you had to sit around a boardroom and talk about what raising prices would look like?
I often have to sit around a boardroom, but not necessarily about tariffs. That's just part of the job. We've talked about tariffs a lot. We've had to do a lot of kind of contingency planning on it. We have changed where we source volumes. China is still a big market for us in terms of where we produce, but we've moved things around. And to date, we haven't raised any prices related to tariffs. The industry might have from a fairly modest basis so far. I would expect if prices are going to be raised across the industry, the consumer will probably start to see them in the August through October timeframe, just based off of the production timelines associated with toys. Because usually it takes somewhere between 3 to 5 months between an order to be placed and a toy to be put on shelf.
The president has said, look, my message to every business in the world is very simple. Come make your product in America, and we'll give you among the lowest taxes of any nation on earth. But if you don't make your product in America, you will have to pay a tariff. Is that what you have to do? I mean, I don't know if you can give an example or if that's a trade secret, but what is an example of like making a shift because you see the writing on the wall, because of this administration's push to reorient the business community?
Well, I think the challenge with nearshoring a large percentage of the toy industry, thinking
and
broader,
to translate to when you say nearshoring, you mean the challenge of bringing this manufacturing factories back to the US.
The challenge with bringing back manufacturing for toys back to the US is when you look at toy manufacturing in China or Southeast Asia, it's been an industry that's developed over the last 30 or 40 years, and it's got all of kind of the ancillary supply chain and component makers associated with it. It's got a workforce that's been trained over decades on the finer points of making toys. And because toys tend to be pretty low volume and high turn versus other manufacturing industries, it tends to still be a lot of human touches on a toy, particularly for things like dolls or action figures where you have to do fine paint jobs on the product.
So, those aren't like robots and lasers yet?
Yeah, it's well, you can, but keep in mind the toy you see on shelf this holiday is probably gone by next holiday. So, like, the fixed costs of automation are difficult to amortize for a product over time. And that's just a challenge with the industry. So, a typical toy that's manufactured in Asia, like labor is 30 to 40% of the cost. A typical toy, if you took that same toy with the same process to manufacture it in the US, just given US labor costs, that toy would be 80 to 90% the cost would be labor. And so it would be somewhere in the neighborhood of 50 to 60% more expensive to produce here.
Can you
So,
tell me what that means in mom money?
yeah. So, like, if you buy an action figure or a doll for $10, you would have to charge $15 to $18 just to maintain the same absolute profit dollars for the company, which isn't that high to begin with. So, in order to bring things back to the US, you would have to figure out how to automate it in a significant way. And that's not impossible, it's just challenging. And then you would have to bring back all that ancillary supplier infrastructure that exists in Southeast Asia and the US. And that's probably a 5 to 10 year endeavor.
So you're bringing the production, but you're also bringing all the other elements,
Yeah.
which are also in those countries.
And that's not unique to toys. That's the
Yeah,
same thing
that's
that
why I'm
exists in
asking. That's a lot of
automotives,
people.
electronics, everything. It's just what happens inside of the toy industry. So, I'm not a naysayer that toy production can come back to the US. I just think it will take quite a bit of time, and we'll have to invent some breakthrough means to be able to lower the costs of it. And so, like, what could be some examples of that? Well, automation is probably the easiest thing to think through. Something we're looking at is 3D printing. And that could be revolutionary, not just for toys, but for a whole host of industries, and basically change the way we think about manufacturing. And that's something we're looking into and investing. But again, that's at least 2 to 3 years before you'd see it on a smaller scale, and probably 5 to 10 years, assuming everything breaks the way you need it to break, before it really becomes a mass thing.
How difficult has it been these last couple months? I know you're a relatively new CEO, so you don't have a whole lot to compare it to. But as people like to say, we're living in unprecedented times. And I can't imagine what it's like trying to make plans for a year from now, 2 years from now, 5 years from now, when you don't even know if these tariffs will keep, you know what I mean? Like, you're seeing changes week to week. I mean, like, I don't understand how you do business in this environment.
Well, I think it's no different than the challenges that any one of my predecessors had to go through. Like,
I
Hasbro.
don't believe that. I don't believe this is really like every 2 months you might have a different set of tariffs in the triple digits.
Well, just to give I'll do a little history lesson.
Yeah,
real
please
quick.
do.
The company was effectively founded in 1860 by Milton Bradley. That was like kind of our earliest predecessor company. So he had to deal with a little thing called the Civil War. Hasbro was founded in 1923. So 6 years later, the Hassenfeld brothers had to deal with the Great Depression. So I feel like I'm in at least some historical company, because I don't think this is anywhere near the level
Fair.
of historical issues that they had to contend with.
I'll dial it back since you've schooled me just now. That's something to really process. So what would you like to see in this economic environment? I mean, we've got people criticizing the Fed. We've got a lot of questions being raised. We've got a lot of countries reaching out to the White House. There's lots of people with questions here. What are yours?
Oh gosh, I really try to stay out of politics. And
Well, I said questions.
Yeah.
So what would you, when you sit down and you're like, okay, what do we have to be thinking about? What's on your list?
Well, I sure think we're thinking about, hey, what are the final tariff rates going to be in what countries? That's just a basic planning assumption. I think we're thinking about, hey, what's going to be the impact of tariffs in terms of the macro? How is it going to affect prices for consumers? How will that affect their share of wallet? how it would affect employment rates in the U.S. and overseas. I also think we're thinking through, just the fundamentals of partnership. In a world where the U.S. is changing its policies and we have partners across the world. And, I recognize we're an American company, but we're an American company with global interests with 1,000 plus partners across the world, from manufacturing partners to fellow toy companies to licensing partners. How do we maintain consistency and help them be able to plan better and rely on us, despite whatever kind of gyrations might happen geopolitically or macroeconomically. We've been around for a while. We take a long-term view of things. And so our general reaction is be agile, but don't overreact. Partner and be constant. Because, if you do something negative or you overreact too much and you impact a relationship, that's gonna be there still 5 years from now when things kind of settle out into either the old normal or a new normal. And we highly value those.
Well, Chris Cox is the chief executive of Hasbro. Thank you so much for talking with us.
Howdy, thanks. See you.